So, you want help picking your next class, and now is it really good or does it suck? In this one, I'm going to show you just that. Hey guys, it's Dan, and welcome back to Unified Gaming. So in this video, I want to go through the good, the bad, and the ugly for all of the PvP classes in the Elder Scrolls Online. This is for the current patch, and I've gone through and played test all of the classes extensively myself, and have made numerous build videos for both 2-bar and 1-bar builds over the past couple of years, so I've got lots of experience. I've played on PCNA, I play on PCEU currently, and I've also played on Xbox EU, so I've got a load of just broad experience for how they feel. As always, I do check these with other players for their opinion, but please take this with a pinch of salt. These are my kind of thoughts and opinions on the classes and where they stand currently, and I will explain everything in much detail. I also have broken the classes into magicka and stamina, even though there is hybridization going on currently. I'm fully aware that many classes use magicka and stamina skills, and that some of them even scale together, like Dragonknight's whip. With that said, however, I do think they are quite distinct classes, like magicka sorcerer and stamina sorcerer are quite different. So I will touch upon those sort of throughout the video, but just understand that I have broken them into key parts because there is a slight difference in my opinion. If you do like these videos though, then do like, do comment and do subscribe. And as always, a massive thanks to everyone at Patreon who helps to support down below, and there's always perks and stuff as well. So what are we doing? Well, for every class, I've gone through magicka and stamina versions where appropriate, and I've had a key kind of just description on the top left. Magicka builds, in my opinion, use magicka skills for damage, utility and healing, and they often have a bigger magicka pool than a stamina pool. They normally use staves as well, but they sometimes use two-handed weapons or dual wield like a Nightblade. Stamina builds use the inverse. They stack stamina as the main attribute, and they use lots of stamina skills like weapon skills, for example, but I do appreciate that this isn't as clear cut as it used to be in the past. I've gone through and ranked every class on these key areas that I think are a really good way to measure a class, and I've put 4 key things to focus on, kind of how easy is it to pick up. So if you're new to the class, is it easy to play or is it quite hard? Is it easy to master and become like the best player at the class? Yes or no? And actually, if you were to fight against these, are they easy or hard? And the build versatility is basically, are there many ways to make a build with this, or are you really forced into 1 or 2 sets? If there's obviously a few sets, then it's a few. If you can make lots of different types of builds, there's loads of sort of versatility. And I've put sometimes on some charts multiple versions, so like the red is the pet sorcerer, blue is non-pet, and I've also put the ranking for like battlegrounds, Cyrodiil, etc. down here. So you can see this on the bottom left. As for the magicka sorcerer, what is it good at? Well, magicka sorcerer has 2 ways to play currently. You have the pet sulk and the non-pet sulk. The pet sulk is really good because it has access to a really strong heal, the Twilight Matriarch. This means your self heal is really high. You're not really reliant on the restoration stuff, which is a bit hit and miss in my opinion, especially the changes that they've done recently. And you also do have some issues with bar space, which means you can't run as many defensive skills, so you might have just 1 shield. Whereas a non-pet sulk can use 2 shields, or even 3 if they really want. So you do get limited with bar space. You do, however, get slightly better AoE damage with the volatile familiar, and as a result of all of this, so your sort of single target burst can be a bit lower because you just don't have as many skills, but it's still pretty good. As for the class identity, if you're on a sorcerer, it's really apparent that you're glowing sort of yellow, you've got a hurricane around you, you've got pets out normally, or shields. It's really obvious to work out they're a sorcerer. For the non-pet sulk, your burst is slightly higher because you can use Haunting Curse quite easy because you've got the bar space. So you often see people use Haunting Curse, Power Overload, they might use Crush and Shock or Elemental Weapon with that, and Streak. So you can get 4 things land within sort of 1 second of each other, doing a lot of damage. Whereas the pet sulk does struggle to get that off because they just don't have the bar space. As with the rest of this, I'd say Sorcerer is a pretty solid class. It's one of the more harder classes to play, so if you were to pick it up, it's not easy. You kind of need to be reactive. So if you were thinking of how does this do in Cyrodiil and in PvP and stuff, Sorcerer is a very good class if you are a good player. If you are kind of an average player, or you just find reacting hard, it's a bit of a mediocre class and it's kind of hit and miss. So that's what I'd say about magicka sorcerer. For stamina sorcerer, it's a bit different. You have access to weapon skills typically, which does really help increase the way you can play. You can use bow and go to bow build. You can obviously use dual wield or 2H and go to melee range. So there are different ways to build this, which gives you a lot more options. You can also go as a sniper, which you can see in the red, and the bow sniper is pretty good actually, because you can use crystal weapon with lethal aim and land 2 things at once. With a magnum shot you've got 3 skills instantly. It's a really nice way to play the class. As magicka and stamina, you'll see the mobility is really high. They can move around really fast, and stamina sorcerer is even faster because they have hurricane on most of the time. You do, however, lose the self-heal strength, which means you have to be a bit more reliant on movement to stay alive, rather than a massive burst heal like other classes such as Dragonknight. As a result though, I'd say stamina sorcerer is kind of a it's okay. It is one of the weaker specs in my opinion, and the ones that you will see out in Cyrodiil or in Battlegrounds often use proc sets to help supplement the damage, which is a bit lower. If you do use proc sets, you can fix a lot of these weaknesses, but I would say overall, sorcerer is one of the weaker classes currently in PvP. If played well, they are phenomenal, but they have a really high skill ceiling. As with Dragonknight, I've broken into magicka and stamina, because magicka one typically uses the class skills and stacks magicka with a bit of stam maybe, whereas stamina stacks, lots of stamina. They use 2-8 to use dual wield, like Master's dual wield for example. With the mag DK, it's just a powerhouse. That's the best way of describing it. It is ridiculously tanky because of some of the passives they have. Their self-heal is just the best in the game. I've been healed on a 1-bar DK for like 18,000 with 1 button. It is ridiculous. Their ultimates, when they use them, give them resources and heal them, so you get really good sustain and good self-heals. They have really good single target burst if you can stack the Molten Whip. So you often see people use things like Noxious Breath, Venom Claw into a Fossilized or Shattering Rock, which then has the whip 2 or 3 already up, and they just hit them with a massive whip. They also have Corrosive, which pushes their damage really high if they really want. So I'd say this is just a really easy class to pick up. And you can see it up here, it's easy to pick up. Is it hard to master? Not really. Is it hard to fight against? Yes. Fighting against a DK is really difficult because their self-heal is so strong. You get them low, bang, back at full health. It is so frustrating to fight against. As for the way you build them, there are a few options. I've gone down the alt gem route on my 1-bar build. There's a video on the channel if you want to check it out, and there's also a page on my website, unifiedgaming.co.uk, so you can check those out there. But yeah, that's kind of the magicka DK. It is a very good class overall, probably one of the stronger ones in my opinion. For stamina DK, it has a very similar profile to magicka DK. You see that it has kind of similar sets, but the DK has the execute as a stamina version, which can help confirm kills that the magicka one can't normally. And I do appreciate, as I said already, that there is a bit of hybridization and some people use a bit of both, but if you were going pure stamina, you would have an easier time finishing people off, and you have access to more dots. You also got the same self-heal because you use the same skill, so that's just brilliant, and you're just stupidly tanky once again. They're really hard to fight against if they are played well, but I say a Stam DK is harder to play than a magicka DK. You also have less options on how you can build them. A Stam DK, you often need to have the Master's Dual Wield, which is a special item from Dragonstar Arena, and if you don't have that, you don't really get enough dot damage on this, so that's just what I'd say about DK. As for Nightblade, there are a few ways to play Nightblade. We have a magicka version and a stamina version. Now the magicka version is in kind of 2 camps. You've got the melee and the range. I focus this more on the sort of the range type of playstyle, where you use something like Swallow Soul, for example, or Crushing Shock, or Elemental Weapon. And then if you were to go for more melee, you might be more towards the stamina version, where you use Concealed Weapon or Surprise Attack. But as I said, there is an overlap between the 2 of these. For the magicka Nightblade, their burst is just really high if you can land it. The Mag Nightblade, because it uses Swallow Soul typically and Crushing Shock or Elemental Weapon, its burst can be a bit slow because you have the projectiles, they do take some time to land. You don't have a delayed skill. Your Spectral Bow is a projectile, so you charge up and then you shoot it. Whereas things like Sorcerer can put Haunting Curse on and shoot another skill when Curse goes off, so you get 2 things hit at once. Whereas a Mag Nightblade really struggles with that, so the burst is lower as a result. That said, if you land it, it hits really hard. If you are as a bomber, so a bomber is somebody who stacks all of their damage, they sacrifice all resource, all defense, all sustain, just everything for in the pursuit of just killing people as quick as they can, ideally one-shots, then of course a bomber has crazy burst potential, but it's you hit somebody, you recharge, and then that's it. It takes ages to kind of get in and out of the fights. A Nightblade, in my opinion, is one of the stronger classes because the mobility is really high. mobility is really important in PvP currently, and they also have very good defensive skills that it doesn't reduce the damage, but you can avoid it completely. So it's a real bit of kind of a caveat that if they get hit, they're squishy, but if they avoid the damage completely, they're tanky. And so I've kind of left it sort of here, but if you were able to use cloak and roll dodge really well, the defense go almost to the end is really, really survivable, but you have to play this really, really well. Nightblade on the whole is a really fun class to play. I would say the magicka version is probably weaker than the stamina version or the melee version because it just doesn't have the finishing power that the melee one does. For the stamina version or the melee type builds, they have really high burst potential because they've got access to executes that they can use in melee range. I do appreciate magicka has Killer's Blade, which they can use, or the Impale, the range version, but it doesn't really scale well, whereas Killer's Blade does crazy damage. I've hit people for 20k on that, it's insane. And then you can spam it. So they've got really good executes, which means their just burst potential goes up massively. You go into a incap, into a surprise attack, into a Killer's Blade, sorry, you can do sort of 15-20k damage within a second and a half. It's a lot of damage. You can also do a heavy attack on the start of that combo. You can use concealed weapon for even more damage, so their burst is really there. As you see though, they are all single target. Melee Nightblades and Stamina Nightblades in particular are just melee damage, and it's on one person and that's it. You will struggle to kill lots of people at once unless you use special items or proxies to fix this, but the class itself doesn't really have good AoE capabilities. The defense is the same as a magicka one. They're very squishy, but if you can move well with the high mobility and you can just avoid getting damaged, then they're actually tanky, but it really comes down on how well you move, which is why they're quite hard to master. If you can use roll dodge, cloak and stuff really well, you will stay alive a long time. As for Templar, there are two versions in my opinion, magicka and stamina. They are very similar because you use kind of a similar set of skills, but they can play slightly differently. So I left them as mag and stam for this occasion. For me, mag Templar is all about using the puncher and sweep, so the magicka jabs using the radiant glory or radiant oppression, and using things like meteor, or they might use the crescent sweep, whereas the stamina Templar focuses more on using a 2H. They might use a few weapon skills with them, maybe a dot or two, but they are very similar, which you can see in the charts. Magicka Templar is really good on paper. It basically has everything covered really well, but not brilliantly, and that's kind of the big weakness of the class, is you've got a pretty good burst. If you can get the power of the light up, that you can jab somebody, so toppling jab, hit them with crescent sweep and then beam, your burst is pretty high. The problem is people can counter it quite easily. So if you land it, it's great, but it's hard to get the damage out on those. And it's the same for all of the sort of Templar. It does everything good, just not amazing. And I think that's the real big issues with magicka Templar, is they're easy to pick up, they're easy to master, they're a little bit hard to kill because they've got pretty good self-heals, especially with Living Dark. Living Dark is a nightmare to fight against. You snare people when they hit you and you heal, it's just ridiculous. And they also have a few ways you can build them, but I'd say like sorcerer, they're kind of, if they're played by good people, they are really good. If they're played by people that are average Joe, sort of run-of-the-mill, they're quite hard to play. So I'd say they're good, but they're not great. Stamina Templar is in the same boat. It has a bit more burst because you can use executes if you wish. You can use things like Dawnbreaker and Spin to Win, so whirling blades. So you got a bit more AoE pressure here, but they're kind of in the same boat as magicka Templar. They're kind of okay. They've got the self-heals that the magicka Templar has. They've got mobility, tankiness, it's okay. But again, they're not brilliant. They're kind of one of the weaker specs. They're good on paper, but not brilliant in actual practicality just because of how the meta is currently. For Warden, you've got magicka and stamina Wardens. Magicka Warden and Stamina Warden are very different because Magicka Warden, in my opinion, uses magicka skills. Things like Vampire Spam Ball, they use Crush and Shock or the Master's Eye stuff, which is what I use personally. So they do play differently, but if they're played well, they're really good. It's one of those classes where it's kind of master of none, but jack of all trades, that type of thing. So they're good at everything, they're just not great at one thing. So they've got good AoE damage, they've got good burst, but it's not the best. They've got good mobility, it's not the best. They've got good utility, it's not the best. And so it's one of these classes where You can get people low really easily, but you cannot finish them off easily, which is the problem. You can hit somebody with a Deep Fissure, with a Master's Ice Reach, for example. You can then do a heavy attack in the middle of that, so Deep Fissure, heavy attack, Ice Reach. Land those with a Dawnbreaker, you're doing 15, 20,000 damage, which is a lot of damage, don't get me wrong. But then you have to wait at least a second because your skills are projectiles mainly, and then people heal up. The melee vampire does kind of help fix this, the Vampton. You can use the vampire spammer, which hits instantly, so you can get an extra hit in, but again, you still have the same issues that you can't execute people easily. So that's where the Warden comes down as a magicka focus. It's really survivable, it's really kind of easy to pick up, but it's really hard to master and get kills on unless you play it really, really well, because you can stay alive, but you're not really getting the final hit. You're not doing enough, 100 to 0 on somebody, just one-shotting them, or doing half the health within one go to actually get the kill. So that's kind of the big problem with Magicka Warden, it lacks the execute. Stamina Warden, because it has the execute, obviously fixes this. Its defense is really high, it's one of the strongest defenses. If you stack health even higher, it can go even higher, because you've got just a bigger health bar to just buffer, and then your heals go up higher because of polar wind. So if you want this to be even tankier, more health means more heals, which means you're tankier as a result. So you see a lot of people run 35, 40,000 health, and they're actually really tanky, but they hit really hard because of the penetration of Deep Fissure. The burst is really high with Deep Fissure into Dawnbreaker and into Execute, or Dizzying Swing, Deep Fissure, Dawnbreaker, Execute. It's a lot of damage at once, and the Executioner really helps fix the issues with killing people at the end. I would say that this is a really strong class as a spec. If you play as a melee magical Stamina Warden, using 2H or a dual wield and have an Execute on there, it is one of the stronger classes in the game currently. It's really good for PvP. It's hard to kill, but it can kill people quite easily, and it has a big burst spike. The issue is though, it doesn't have really good dot damage. So if you want to play as a dot build, it's kind of, yeah. You can use dots, you can get good penetration from some of your skills, so you can do okay dot pressure, but this is definitely best played with an Execute as a 2H in my opinion. But it's one of those classes where if you can sort of pick it up and you can kind of get to that high skill ceiling, which isn't massively high, then it's hard to kill because it's just so tanky because of how strong the self heals and stuff are if they're stacked. But you have to really stack this in a certain way to make it work. For Magicka Necromancer and Stamina Necromancer, these classes are really interesting. They're kind of like a cross between Sorcerer and Warden. Magicka Necromancer, like I said with Magicka Warden, uses things like Crushing Shock. They might use a Master's Ice Staff or a Master's Inferno Staff. They might use Elemental Weapon, but they play at range, or there's a Vampire melee version of this. You might notice in the past there was a Harmony version as well, but that's no longer a thing. On paper, they are phenomenal. Higher damage than Deep Fissure, like 18,000 Blast Bones quite easily. It hits as hard as Dawnbreaker. It just doesn't have the Execute. It's the same issue that Warden has. There's no Execute in the class kit that is reliable, and as a result, you can't finish people off easily. So you have to rely on that, getting that burst window just right when they're about half health to just kill them from 50% to 0, like a Magicka Warden can. If you do it, it's really, really good. But if you can't, then you have to then recharge, get your ultimate back up to try and get that window again. So they are a bit slow to play. As for kind of the Necromancer, they're a good class. You kind of know they're a good class. They're just well-rounded. I would say though, as I said, they do struggle to kill people. One thing to note is that they are really hard to master. So if you want to master this class, you will need a lot of practice to do so. The Stamina version though, like with the Magicka Warden, fixes all of these issues. It basically gives you the Execute, which means you can kill people. It's really tanky. It's got Intensive Mender, it's got Spirit Guardians, you can either reduce damage or you can do more damage. It's got great AoE burst. It's just a solid class. It does, however, have the issues with pathfinding from Blast Bones. So if you use Blast Bones, it doesn't always land. If it does land with Dawnbreaker, you've got basically 2 Dawnbreakers at once. It's a lot of damage. Dizzying Swing into Blast Bones into Dawnbreaker into Execute does one-shot a lot of players. So it's just a really important thing to note. I would say though that this is kind of similar to Templar. It's good, it's not great. If you were to kind of go, what are the best classes currently? We have, I would say the best one is probably Dragonknight, Magicka Stamina Dragonknight's really good. Nightblade's really good currently. Templar's okay. Warden's really good currently. And Stamina Necromancer's okay. Sorcerer's kind of in the middle one. It's really good if you are able to play it really well. It's really hard and not great if you play it badly. I've then made 2 bonus charts for those people curious, Werewolf and Vampire. Werewolf, if you were to play as a Werewolf, just looking at the Werewolf skills directly, it's got pretty good burst, it's got pretty good single target damage, pretty good dot, it's got really tankiness, it's really mobile because it moves quickly, it's got massive self-heal, so it's not a bad thing to play, and the more you stack, the better these things get, because you get bonus like benefits for being in a bigger group of werewolves, so you can stay in there longer, you can get access to better synergies, you can do more damage as a group, so a werewolf is a really good class type thing to play. They play really well on sorcerers particularly, or on templars because of the bonus damage they get. And then vampire, if I were to go what is a vampire by just being a vampire by itself, it's really tanky because of undeath, it's got great mobility because of misform, it's got an okay spammable, that's about it. You can obviously put this on any class, which then means a class that might lack, say, a bit of defense. So if you go as something like a Stamina Templar, defense is a little bit weaker than some of the other classes. If you put on, Vampirism and went with stage 3, you then push that defense up to make it tankier. So that's how people often use this. They go as Vampire stage 3 just for the defense and maybe the misform as a movement skill. But that's all the classes there, guys. I appreciate it's a lot of information, and if you want to see these charts, they are available on www.unified-gaming.co.uk. There is a website, so you can check it out there. But I appreciate this is a lot of information in quite a concise format. If you get any questions about this, or just about stuff generally, let me know down below and I'll try my best to answer, or join my Discord. And as always, if you like what I do here, then make sure that you are subscribed, and a huge thanks to everyone over Patreon who helped make these videos possible. If you want to support myself and get access to exclusive content and more, there's details down below. But I'll catch you in the next video. So take care, guys. Thanks for watching, and bye.